How dare those diabolical constructs, those mutant constructs of reality infringe my health, my welfare, by erecting antennas in my street that are going to send rogue photons into every atom of my body and be able to read and scan me and my family in the sanctity of our own home. I mean, that is an outrage beyond measure, beyond imagining, and yet it's happening.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I have with me Sacha Stone. He established Humanitad 1999 and founded New Earth Project. It's a self-determined community about sustainability and sovereignty over your life, your energy that's on this planet. Also, documentary filmmaker, and this is why we're here today talking about 5G. So many of you heard about it. I was really unaware of what was going on with 5G until I attended Alternative View 10 in just a bit outside of London there in May with Ian Crane. Also, the documentary film that Sacha has already produced about this, the 5G apocalypse.
Can I just jump in by saying you're making that dissonance, that you're making that wonderfully human dissonance error again by talking about them miseducating us, or it's not them. What, in the truest sense of the word, when I am being miseducated in a particular situation, I am the one, and the geometry of me here now is the creature that is manifesting the creature that is miseducating me. So I am the one always doing it. I am the alpha and the omega in that sense. Once I get that, then that narrative becomes moot. It doesn't exist any longer because we transpose it into a higher octave of expression. And I keep saying this, and I know I'm quite annoying in so doing, but because it is so vital that we step into the indivisible line between this and that, between them and us, step into the duende flame, which is the indivisible. That's the point at which the breath exhaled becomes the breath inhaled. Try and find that point. You'll have a very hard time. Even with an electron microscope and a telescope, you won't find it, because there is no point at which the breath exhaled turns around and becomes the breath inhaled. There is no point. It cannot be identified. It is a living principle, not a fact in a sense. So one has to align to that principle, step into that duende, that space between worlds, that indivisible line, and recognize in that state of timelessness that I am that I am. I ideate, I manifest, I embody. And then step back into the 3D temporal world and recognize that every single thing that happens to me is my design, is the geometry of my soul screaming into the void. Teach me, show me, reflect back to me, upgrade me, degrade me, until I step into that flame. This is vital. Otherwise, we're simply having blah, blah.
The point I remember that I was saying is the ascension, or the points you're talking about here, seem to be happening faster, and people are noticing that when they are thinking or using what you're talking about and what I understand as well. It actually is working at a faster point where the reflection back to you is occurring at a much faster rate versus what it was 15 or 20 years ago. Now people are starting to catch on that, hey, maybe a bunch of us can start to think a certain way and bring forth what we're doing here at the same time, because it's not taking as long for your thoughts to turn into something on the third dimensional plane here. It's quite interesting, the speed up in terms of what the sun's frequency and the rest of these Berkeley currents firing in on our star and our solar system are doing with us as well, in terms of just the quickness of things manifesting, the quickness of the energies. Everything's just turning faster. And I'm not talking about living in your waking daily life where 24 hours seems like it's 12 hours now. I'm taking it, when it will start going from point A to point B, seems to be just much, much faster now. Things that would take years are now seem to be taking months. So moving forward, where do we go in terms of the 5G awareness to getting people, instead of it taking 5 years like it did with an anti-fracking campaign? Well, where does it go now with turning all this awareness of 5G into just months before everybody says, no, enough of that. We already know enough. We don't need that. Don't want it.
It's already over. It's already over. It's already over. I mean, we have to continue this dialogue. We have to continue with this active campaign because it is so valuable and can teach so many people about the tyranny of government, about the overreach of government and technocracy, and the fact that we have been interposed, we have been degraded, downgraded, we have been ecocided by a diabolical collusion between government and business, meaning to say banking, usury, parasiticism. That is the source code of the destructivity that we're trying to resurrect ourselves from at the moment. So it's vital that we continue with the active campaign of the 5G thing, because it's the perfect meme to educate and awaken and upgrade our consciousness. But in point of fact, the threat is by and large over. Why? Because I say so, David. Because I project my plasma into the field, my vibral life force, which is so active, so alive, so anchored into the now, that it will manifest the outcome, far more so than 10 million people who are projecting Atlantean mythos into the void and dreaming bad dreams, informed to them by MTV culture or by the propaganda of their church or their local government, or culture. So the point is, actualized Homo sapiens sapien, placing attention and projecting life force into the field is what now prevails, which goes back to what you just said a few moments ago about the exponential increase in our capacitance to manifest outcomes. Now, agreed. Is it going to be 10 times quicker now to remediate the 5G threat to what the fracking threat was? I'll wager it's 100 times or 1,000 times quicker. In point of fact, we will not need to go in and create those riots and petitions. I just this morning received a direct message from one of the highest ranking figures in the intelligence, military intelligence in the world, in Washington, D.C., saying that my film was shared with colleagues in, I can't name that particular department for obvious reasons, but the head of the department in one of the highest, and I'm talking the top 3 military intelligence hubs on the face of the earth, contacted me to say that the 5G Apocalypse film was received, watched, and seriously educated colleagues in that intelligence hub. And they were not aware of the diabolical nature of the threat. But the individual concerned informs me, who is the head of the division, informed me that they have had some very grave and serious concerns within that intelligence unit about what 5G may be all about. So this is a classic case in point. They don't even know because they're compartmentalized, hyper compartmentalized. So this particular pernicious evil is being permissioned through a very invisible kind of technocratic series of protocols. So every time we see something proliferating on the front pages or on CNN and Fox, we have to almost go into the diametric opposite and say the opposite is true of what we're seeing, and we'll be halfway closer to the truth. But that all tells me that we are living in the dying embers of our age. There is a meltdown, a meta-psychological, meta-cultural, meta-socio-political meltdown underway. And folks like you and I and those who are aligned to this particular noble journey that we're on of truth-saying and disclosure and right action, we are rising like the proverbial phoenix. It is a beautiful compression event, and I am loving this world at this time.
Yeah, and these powerful words, I do not consent, fill in the blank at the end. I don't consent to the 5G network being unfurled and unveiled across my city. I don't consent to that. Now, how many more people need to say, I don't consent to it before it's stopped in its tracks? You know, what I realized at AV10 was the awareness was really brought on by the tree cutting. It wasn't really about the dangers of health or something, but once they realized how many trees were being cut, they said, I do not consent anymore. And it seems to have stopped in quite a few rollouts across the UK and several places just by the simple fact saying, I do not consent to that. And once it's that energy again, it's that energy of the politicians knowing, I don't give the politicians much creed anyway. I don't really even believe that we have a role for them. I think it's that locked narrative. I don't consent to these politicians trying to dictate we can't collect our own rainwater, we can't grow our own food in our own yards. Why not? Yeah. Yes. I don't consent to you telling me I can't do that. I have my own sovereignty where I can produce my own food. I have the skill. You're not going to tell me to stop. I don't consent. And if enough people say I don't consent, they just start growing their food. Nobody can walk in and say don't do it any longer. And again, I'll bring it back. How many times in history have we seen this? Say I don't consent enough times, enough people get on board with that same thought process, and it's over. That shifts straight away out of that the mind froth there. But last thing though, I do stay in the light. I won't go outside that. I've been in the light since I can ever remember, and I won't ever deviate from that. Because I believe about bringing us to that rise in level and helping humanity step. And if I can be part of that conduit and keep that vibration consciousness where people look and say, wow, what kind of frequency is that guy keeping? He seems happy all the time. He seems like he's trying to help. He's not trying to hurt. The message I try to give is a hopeful one for as we move through all these changing and challenging times here. They're meant for us, but they're meant for us to work through in a very harmonious way. So I'll leave it at that. And remember those words, I do not consent. And if we can get that onto, why wouldn't there be a hashtag, I do not consent to 5G?
Well, why not take it further? If we're serious about not consenting, get up sofas and do something about not consenting. And I do think it's a vital first step. It's vital because that is where we begin to recognize the indignity that is being perpetrated against us. So yes, absolutely. I do not consent is integral as the source code because that's used. Get out of my face. I am not participating in this Babylonian dream spell, this black magic any longer. Do not consent. Do not engage the contract. Engage right action and pure truth. Walk in a straight line and you will prevail. And if enough people did that on one day, which we would shift this civilizational wheel in an instant. That is a fact. So the I do not consent is vital, but take it forward. What about the class actions? What about filing in the local courtroom? What about paying that $95 fee and filing in the local courtroom so that you can take the wet ink signature of the bureaucrat down the road whose signature is permissioning the erection of that 5G lamppost outside your child's bedroom. Now that is dynamic action, consciousness in action, and embodiment and manifestation. Those are the things we need to do. We are living in a civilizational lull where we are pornographicized into indolence, laziness, inaction, thinking that because we can see the world screen that we are living out there. No, we are not. It's called vicarious. It's called avatar. It's called not living. It's called being dead and actually living vicariously through a screen. Not the same thing. Simply because you watch a rant on YouTube does not mean you are doing anything about the issue that you are watching being ranted about. And we are so dissonant that we can watch a bunch of angry activists, then put the computer screen down and go to bed thinking, yeah, well, I showed the man, didn't I? No, you didn't, baby. You watched YouTube. I'm sorry to be so vociferous on this point, but it is vital that we make a distinction between the I do not consent and the I am the difference. My flesh and bones is the difference. Now, we've been saying I don't consent since medieval times. We've been saying to King John back in the day, no, we don't want to pay the gold for taxes. We've been saying it since Martin Luther King. We've been saying it since Nelson Mandela. None of that matters a jot. Petitions are factored into the business model. Angry citizens sitting in sofas, looking at screens and tapping away I do not consent are also factored into the Babylonian business model. But what is not factored in is when you take your life force, your prana, the highest value, the highest dynamic of that which exists, which is your life force, Kundalini, and we take that life force and we place our attention, because placing attention is projecting life force, and we then enact, embody. That is something that is not and cannot be factored into a business model and will win the day. So, which is why I welcome activists like yourself. You are embodying and enacting. You're not simply vicariously expressing yourself through other people's opinions. And that becomes vital. But enough people have to be doing that in order to change the outcome. That is what quantum mechanics and quantum physics teaches us. We know where we place attention, that's what manifests the outcome or affects the outcome. So simple as that. When we are being bombarded with cultural decay, with ideas like climate change, and that's what we see. It's called social engineering, and that's done through the media and propaganda machine. But we are the ones expending our life force and our attention to those false narratives and empowering them. In the same way that our coin to Caesar, our tax dollars, are manifesting the war, the disease, and the poverty that proliferate all around the world.
Yeah, I want to go back into this taking action on the lawsuits here. As soon as you start throwing lawsuits on a civil, not a criminal, people get really scared because you can take their house, you can take their car, you can take their earnings, etc. So walk us through this first point for those people who do want to take action and file it's going to be different in every jurisdiction that you go to, but you mentioned $95 or 95 pounds there, sorry, where you're at. So, walk somebody through the action of where do they start? How do they find out even a name that they need to put some litigation toward, or a company name, or where do they just direct this paperwork toward? So give us the first step and then kind of walk us through the process to be able to go, here you go, that's for you.
There is no generic process, so I can't help there. What you do is you get up and you walk down to the local courtroom and you speak to the clerk of the court about the issue, and you get the fine. That would probably be the simplest way of doing it. Or you go online and you research it for longer than 15 minutes, and you will absolutely be able to find a fairly direct protocol. But yeah, the jurisdictions, the protocols, procedures, the systems in Peru and Mozambique, Ecuador and Indonesia are vastly different, for sure. So there is no catch-all response to that, other than the fact that the draconian juridical system, court systems are there. They are a defilement of all natural law. They in and of themselves are corrupt mafiosi masquerading as courts of law. They are commercial clearinghouses. They conduct business and commerce on behalf of Luciferians. That's what courts are. The International Court of Justice, arguably the greatest criminal of all. And they are designed, engineered, and situated in order to protect special interests, which is to say, ultimately, government, military, policing, and elite banking, and then we get into bloodlines. That's what the court system has been designed to protect and serve, not the living of the living soil. But having said that, in order to get the consent of the living people of the living soil, the protocols that govern those court systems and juridical processes had to be designed, mandated, and signed off by living people of the soil. So if you care enough about the matter of law and jurisprudence, then you will find that the manifests or the mandates of the local courtroom will serve you if you know how to navigate that Babylonian logic. So to some great extent, one can utilize the corrupted court systems, or you can do what we've been doing, and you can set up your own court. We set up the International Tribunal in 2015. People laughed at us. We went on to conduct multiple seatings and hearings to good effect. We then went on to launch a year ago the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into, and that has had a phenomenal effect around the world, which is why I've got heads of intelligence networks and units contacting us. Precisely because we created a legitimate and lawful and legal jurisdiction. Well, lawful jurisdiction, but also legal in the strictest sense. We established that jurisdiction and we began the process of the inquiries. We just 3 weeks ago seated in Indonesia, in Asia, a 2-day Judicial Commission of Inquiry into weaponization of the biosphere. And we had the leading figures in the world, like Del Bigtree on vaccinations, Sue Gray on environmental destruction, G. Edward Griffin and Jim Humble, the old legends, on the criminality of the pharmaceutical industry, flew in to give expert witness testimony. That Judicial Commission of Inquiry, which will come out in the next few weeks, and people will begin to see that one, which is an inquiry into the weaponization of the biosphere, which is taking into account things like 5G and bringing in the expert testimonies. Believe you me, when that media gets out, the agencies promulgating the threats of 5G and vaccinations and ecocide have a very serious thought before they continue enacting their wet ink signatures on policy, on rogue policy. But I suggest that we come at it from both angles. We engage our dynamic action, consciousness in action. We embody and enact things on the one hand, up to and including setting up our own tribunals and courts of law. It's hard work, but you can do it, and you should do it. Or you can, piggyback onto the International Tribunal or other movements in the world, such as they exist. But at the same time, counterpoint that manifest action with another more important action, which is the consciousness upgrade, the recognition that the them that I'm dragging into the courtroom, and I must salute them and thank them for being great teachers during this galactic sleep cycle. And then I released them. And then I detach my attention altogether. So there are higher ways of enacting jurisprudence than playing court. Playing court is an important one in the mechanics, in the mechanical level. But there's a higher value set when we disengage our consciousness and our attention, our life force, from that which we believe to be the threat. Recognize that we manifested it. It was a perfect teacher. Now we release it. So 5G, thank you for coming into the midst. Thank you for coming and posing an existential threat to every atom and molecule and cell on the face of the earth. Thank you for all of that, 5G. I now disengage and release you back into the void. Wow, that's power, and that's real reality. But you have to be somewhat awake to get it. Otherwise, you're still stuck in psycho-intellectual and psycho-emotional responses and reflexes and reactions to reality. You're caught up in the dialectic, in the game, and there you'll remain. It's a choice.
Yeah, it's going to be a choice that we all have to make, or as we get on, and the choice is being made, well, perhaps they could be manifested or started by discussions just like this to be able to at least move that into where then you are making a conscious aware choice, and you're making a conscious aware choice. And that's the whole reason we're having this conversation right here. So Sacha, we're going to wrap up right now. It's going on almost an hour. Anything else you want to, you've taken us in a different direction, thinking about options instead of just physically fighting in the third dimension that so many people are on. Yeah, we're going to have a protest over here. Yeah, we're going to do it physically, and we're going to fight back, literally fight back with protest signs, and taking it same old direction that it's been for how, like you said, thousands of years. We don't, the kings of England, the czars of the empires, it just continues chapter after chapter after chapter, and everybody's sort of been, we come back to that again, the us and the them. So taking that physical of the them and fighting against the them in the physical third dimension with the, getting your feet on the street and pounding on the doors and battling the police and the protest signs, and you hear people trying to rip down towers and do all kind of things to break the cooling systems to cause them to ignite on fire.
I love all of that. I'm all for that. How dare any so-called authority situated within the damn federal government, which is a corporation masquerading as a government, which is there for one reason and one reason alone, which is to harvest my time and motion and my life force whilst I'm alive on this earth. How dare those diabolical constructs, those mutant constructs of reality infringe my health, my welfare by erecting antennas in my street that are going to send rogue photons into every atom of my body and be able to read and scan me and my family in the sanctity of our own home. I mean, that is an outrage beyond measure, beyond imagining, and yet it's happening. Right now, they put LED light bulbs in every street. These are entropic, these are Atlantean, they infuse you with death coding. That's what it does. It's the opposite of life affirming in terms of electrical values. And yet we're being sold on the back of the climate swindle. We've been sold, and sustainability swindle by the UN. We've been sold the fact that, oh, we must put these cheap technologies in place. No. How about we stop the oil and gas plunder, the rape of Gaia? How about we release the sequester technologies from within the basement of the unlawful military-industrial complex? How about we storm the damn Vatican Library and the vaults in the Vatican? How about we storm the damn vaults of the Smithsonian Institute and the British Museum and find our real archaeology and our real science sequestered therein? These are questions that arise, and I'm all for people taking back their cities, taking back their streets, taking back their health, using whatever methods they need to protect themselves and their family. But I still say a far more effective way of dealing with the whole hologram is to recognize the simple fact that I am the genesis point of all that which exists on my radar screen. I am permissioning it. I now uncouple from it. I depermission it. I retreat my life force, or I rescind and retract my life force and place it now onto the other. Well, that diabolical construct of government, of church, of state, of history, false narrative, false light, idolatry, Luciferianism, all that stuff moves away in the blink of an eye. So it all comes down to a shift in consciousness, which is why I say we must fight 5G with everything we've got, but only in as much as we recognize that the 5G represents that indivisible line between how we've allowed the encroachment of government, of mutant civilizational wheels, to try to completely subsume all that is alive, all that is real, all that is organic, all that is human.
It's the final battle. This is it. I mean, we come up to this point. If that system is installed, we as a human species are going to have some very, we're going to be locked into something that we don't want to be locked into. You know, will we transmute into, will there be a in species? You know, I've talked about this often with my thoughts about Sasquatch and the human Homo sapiens sapien. Was there a time in history where that same choice was made to accept the technology or to go off and live in nature, in the forest, etc.? So that split. Are we back at the same point again, iteration 2.0? And that, you know, I think about some of these things at times.
That's beautifully stated. I love what you just said. And that is a conversation I'd love to have with you at some point, because yes, it's the fork in the road, and you're absolutely right. We're about to see the deconstruction, the decommissioning of the cityscapes, a return to the agrarian landscapes, a revivification of all that is organic and sentient and real, as opposed to the artifice, the fiction of governments and churches through the annals of history.
All right, and that'll wrap it up. Been talking with Sacha Stone again, sachastone.com. That's SACHA Stone, STONE.com. You can get a full rundown on what he's been involved with, establishing Humanitad in 1999, taking us forward and finding the New Earth Project. Well, it's all about a self-determined community, sustainability, and sovereignty over your own existence, your own life, and again, your life force. And again, that documentary, 5G Apocalypse. And Sacha, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Beautiful. Thank you, David. Lovely meeting you.